On this edition of The Correspondents, President Obama bids farewell to the U.S. military after 8 years as Commander-in-Chief, as President-elect Trump prepares to take over the job of steering U.S. forces in multiple arenas. Russia's suspected interference in the 2016 U.S. election is the subject of 2 U.S. Senate hearings as lawmakers and defense officials weigh in on cybercrime. And the U.S. Congress goes back to work as Republicans eye an ambitious legislative agenda with full control of the House and the Senate, and soon the White House as well. Hello and welcome to The Correspondents on Voice of America. I'm Arcega in Washington. Well, it's a time for goodbyes and appreciation. The United States Armed Forces paying tribute this week to their Commander-in-Chief, President Barack Obama, at a joint base in Arlington, Virginia. In a full dress ceremony Wednesday, members of the United States Fighting Forces were on hand to thank the president for his 8 years of leadership and decision-making. The president leaves office on January 20th. He thanked the military for the sacrifices made during his tenure and noted that the United States must never hesitate to act, but should never rush blindly towards conflict. Defense Secretary Ash Carter presented Mr. Obama with the Medal of Distinguished Public Service as the nation's Commander-in-Chief. And to discuss what's next and the challenges that still lie ahead for the U.S. military in areas of continuing conflict around the world, we are joined, of course, on Skype from Annapolis, Maryland, by international correspondent Jamie Dettmer, who has spent a lot of time covering the conflict in Syria, and right here in Washington by VOA's Pentagon correspondent Carla Babb, who's expected to be very busy over the next coming weeks and months. Carla, obviously a period of transition for the top office of the land. It's not a luxury that the military often has, is having this nice peaceful transition. Wars continue on a number of fronts, but how does the military expect to maintain continuity as we change leaders?
Well, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Joe Dunford, will remain in charge, the top military general, throughout this entire transition. Also, we're looking in just a little less than a week of having General James Mattis being confirmed, hopefully, the Trump administration says, by the Senate for the new Secretary of Defense position. So all of this is going to be happening in the next few days. Then Secretary Carter is going to be aiding him during that process as well. And there are already generals that have been established on the fronts of war, so they will continue to lead the battles abroad in the Middle East, in Afghanistan, and in Iraq. So
they will maintain continuity as the priorities change depending on what the leader of the country wants to do, correct?
Absolutely.
So Jamie, let me get you into this. How does a changing of the guard at the White House have any impact on the situation on the ground? Does it?
Well, it's hard to plot what Trump will do. His campaign trail pronouncements were often vague, frequently contradictory, and kind of lack substance. And we're all left, to be honest, speculating about what that will mean in terms of defense and foreign policies. Immediately in Syria, there probably won't be an impact. In the end, the Assad horse has bolted. As the Obama administration shifted from its support of regime change to prioritizing the fight against the Islamic State, Putin, of course, starting last winter actually, intervened, has shifted the entire battlefield weight towards Assad. As you know, last month, eastern Aleppo, fell to Assad's forces, mainly Iraqi Shia fighters, Iranian Shia fighters, and the Lebanese Hezbollah group, but with Russian air support. We've now got a ceasefire that was engineered by Ankara and Moscow, and in the end, and that's largely holding, by the way, in the end, I think that what we're going to see is the Syria conflict is going to be decided by Ankara, Tehran, and Moscow. The US has been sidelined from this, and I don't see any signs that Trump will want to shift back to focusing on Assad. He's voiced doubts about regime change anyway. His priority is going to be the taking down of ISIS. And there one can see areas of increased cooperation between Moscow and Washington. Fundamentally, the one constant we've heard from Trump is his wish to improve relations with Moscow. That holds out a lot of different consequences in terms of our relationship with European allies, and what happens in the Middle East.
Yeah, I want to talk to you a little bit more about that, elaborate on the situation in Syria in a little bit. But Carla, I guess I want to talk to you about the war on terror, and particularly the military's progress, the progress it's seen, at least on the ground, in regaining some of the territory taken by Islamic State. Do you anticipate any change in how the incoming administration is likely to deal with the war on terror as opposed to President Obama? Is there going to be any drastic changes there?
Well, there's been speculation around Washington on how President Trump is going to handle the crisis in Afghanistan. As you know, the situation there are fewer than 15,000 international troops in Afghanistan, and this has been a fight by the Afghans for the last couple of years. And so speculation has said, well, would a President Trump want to, for the short term, increase the number of U.S. troops in Afghanistan to kind of help them get on their footing again, because they have been kind of stagnant for the past year. It's been a very difficult fighting season for them, and their Air Force, for example, is not going to be ready for another few years. So that is something that we'll be looking at in the coming year. When you shift to the Iraq and the Syria situation, the U.S. and the coalition has made a lot of progress against Islamic State. So there doesn't really seem to be any sort of look here in Washington on where will he change the status quo, because the status quo is slowly working. If you look at a map, for example, of Iraq and Syria, you can see that there's been the majority, I think around 61% of the Islamic State territory during their height has been taken back by the Iraqis. About 28 to 30% of their territory has been taken in Syria. You can see the green is the territory that the Islamic State has lost since 2014. And then when you
there have been big gains there, but as you know, President-elect Donald Trump has been very critical of the military's handling of the war on terror, particularly Islamic State. Has he telegraphed or signaled any possibility of boosting the number of troops that we have there on the ground? What are his plans? Are we hearing anything at all?
It's too soon to tell on that, and I'll tell you why, because General Mattis has not taken the position yet. I think that President Trump is going to look toward General Mattis to say what's needed there. And he will in turn look at his generals on the ground. So we'll see that developing in the coming months, probably. It's too soon to say until after everyone has gotten settled there. I know that President Trump also wants to focus on cyber. He's asked the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff to look into all of the wars and all the fronts at home to see where the U.S. is vulnerable in the cyber domain, and he wants to bolster that. So there's going to be a lot coming in the days ahead.
Right. And Jamie, I want to get back to what we were talking about in Syria there. We do know what the current president's opinion is of Bashar al-Assad. He does want him out, but we have this sort of cozy relationship right now between Russia and the United States. Your thoughts on the future role of the United States, at least in that arena, in Syria? Are we going to be playing a much smaller role, a support role? What do you anticipate?
No, I think I agree with Carla. It's too early to say whether we'll commit more ground troops, but I think the president will start getting very frustrated with the slow progress when it comes to Mosul and Raqqa. And there I can see that he might be led to do some kind of troop surge to help the Iraqi forces in Mosul and to start a battle for Raqqa. But there are big problems there. Yes, one can look at this map and see vast areas that ISIS has lost, but a lot of that is unpopulated or thinly populated areas. In the end, the Islamic State is defeated on the battlefield in Mosul and Raqqa, and we're still months away from Mosul falling. From being retaken by Iraqi forces. We haven't even got an offensive starting on Raqqa yet, although interestingly, we are seeing an increase in airstrikes on Raqqa, and more on Raqqa than on Mosul. Yesterday, there were 23 airstrikes on Raqqa, only 6 on Mosul by the US-led coalition. I mean, one of the big problems about Raqqa is who's going to be the ground force to retake that city. The Arab militias who make up a very small part of the Syrian Democratic Forces, which is Kurdish-led, are not capable of taking Raqqa on their own. There are grave doubts about the Kurds retaking basically an Arab city. The Turks are opposed to that. So there's a lot of confusion there. I do, however, see signs that there could be greater cooperation, as I said before, between Moscow and Washington in the fight against ISIS. which then allows, in a sense, the start of this improved relations between Moscow and Washington that Trump has said he's wanted. But there are lots of consequences here. How do we play out the Iran scenario? Iran is getting stronger as a result of Assad surviving. Iran is an ally of Russia. Is Putin going to dump Tehran to please Washington? Right. And there are also consequences for the whole Ukraine situation.
It's a complicated situation in so many different areas and big challenges, obviously, for the incoming president. So I appreciate both of you working on these stories for us. Thank you so much, Carla and Jamie. It's time now for a quick break. But when we come back, Russian hacking and the U.S. election taking center stage at the U.S. Senate this week. We'll tell you what Congress is learning from intelligence officials right after the break. This is The Correspondents on Voice of America.